Hi everyone, my name is Mia Pierce. I am one of the Peer Success Coaches here at DVC, and this workshop here is going to be on setting goals, time management, and motivation. Just as a bit of a disclaimer, there will be music playing every now and then, just so that way people feel at ease and are kind of just like stimulated with this sort of stuff. I know that sometimes sitting through a long video can be a bit taxing. I think that's a good place to start for the time being. So let's get a move on. So in this workshop, what we'll be going over today is, and I just decided to put a couple of time indicators here, where we're just going to be pondering a few things for a bit, just so that way we get our brains thinking. We'll be talking about motivation and its barriers, and I'll also be mentioning why it's important to tackle that in the first place. I will be also talking about ACT, which is Acceptance Commitment Training, and the bus analogy, alongside values, setting goals, how to get started with setting goals, the different kinds of goals that are out there, because goal is more generalized of a term than we thought, how to get started with time management, kind of basic stuff, time management apps/tricks, and also trying to at least address the neurodivergent students that are out there, because I personally myself have autism spectrum disorder and also ADHD, so I kind of tackled this workshop specifically so that way I could try and introduce something to my peers out there going through the same thing, beyond just the generic like, oh, just write it down in a note somewhere, because it is difficult. So before we begin, I guess it's a good thing to start and think to ourselves, how do you think your semester will go? Depending on if you just recently started or you're popping in midway. How do you feel about doing homework? And we'll get into why that's important later. And do you consider yourself to be someone who has a lot of time/energy to do things? Along with, does thinking about making a plan make you anxious? And I think it is best to dedicate this time for you to talk with either somebody else or just sit there and brainstorm at your own leisure for like a minute or so to think about what you feel when you think about these questions and why you might feel that way. So feel free to pause and we'll move on in a moment. Okay. So, assuming that you have kind of thought it out a little bit, we'll be getting more in depth with drum roll. So, moving on to motivation, more than meets your mind. Aside from the obvious transformer pun, one study of college students with ADHD cites that motivation stems from a part of your management/executive skills that is not as automatic as everything else. So, you are going to have to kind of exert a bit of effort, it seems, to motivate yourself to do something, which I can understand might be a little not fun to think about, because sometimes getting motivated is very easy, especially when it's with something you like. There is a moderate correlation between positive motivation and one's academic performance improving. Makes sense given that if you're motivated to do well in school, you will try to find the means necessary to do well in school, and then you will succeed. A lack of positive motivation can sometimes prove to be a barrier, if nothing else is an obstacle to our academic success. So we're starting with motivation today, and why might that be the case? If one isn't motivated, it might be a little difficult to set goals or manage your time. Of course, sometimes it is the other way around. You know, there is duality. Everyone's situation is different. Focusing on external reasons for why one procrastinates or struggles to manage time is good, because there obviously is going to be a reason out there sometimes. But people sometimes overlook how past experiences and certain mindsets can influence them as well. So let's put that into perspective. I did want to mention before we moved on to this perspective, though, that when the phrase of past experiences and certain mindsets gets put into play, it's not to say that, it's the person's fault for embracing them, because sometimes the things we go through in life are very unavoidable, and they are going to condition us to feel a certain way about something. Getting over procrastination is not an easy process, but at least knowing that this is kind of a natural thing for everyone to go through, and it's not as bad as a lot of people say it to be, is I think something important that I personally want to address, and that I hope I can address in physical workshops as well. So, for those barriers, what are they? For another moment or so, reflect on what demotivates you or messes up your mojo, and how that impacts your life. And just for a few examples, we have no interest in assignment, no idea how to start, very valid reason to feel a bit discouraged, discouragement from others, work-life imbalance, unfortunately the list can go on. When it impacts your life, some examples could be like missed deadlines, stress, withdrawal from doing those activities or even things that you enjoy, passing by potential opportunities like, oh, I could go for this internship, but I don't necessarily feel like it. And although that is a valid reason, sometimes if it doesn't work with you, that's okay. It is also important to mention that, like, if it's something that you really wanted to do, but something just kind of got in the way of that, that is also a very valid feeling to acknowledge, and that might happen every now and then. I know that's happened to me personally. This sort of thing can also lead to low self-worth and exhaustion, but if there was something else in your life that demotivated you or something of that sort, it impacted your life in a certain way, it's always good to think that over. So go ahead and pause this. We also have a chart here from that study with the college students with ADHD, and they had listed a couple of popular reasons as to why they might have struggled with procrastination. So obviously, the result of all of this is going to be procrastination. Procrastination has been defined more as an avoidance of unpleasant thoughts and feelings associated with the task rather than the task itself. No one likes being constantly stressed out, so sometimes it's best to distance yourself from these negative feelings. Not a bad thing all the time, given that we are only human. Worth mentioning that every now and then. And which leads us into this idea of acceptance and commitment training. It's a mindfulness exercise refined and tested by these researchers by the name of Camille Sent and Susan Bowes. I hope I am pronouncing that correctly. And this is supposed to help you overcome these unpleasant feelings that you may experience when you have something that you need to do, or that you have to do and you can't really swerve away from it, maybe like a birthday party or having to buy groceries even though it's not really for you. So ACT, as we'll call it, is supposed to affirm that the distress you feel when you have to do these things and think about them is not abnormal. Or maybe not everyone, but a good chunk of people might go about their day and say, like, procrastination is almost a bit of a death sentence. It can be in some situations where if you procrastinate too much, you might not be able to do your homework, and that's very scary. And to just simply shut that up and suppress that down is simultaneously very scary and unhealthy. And obviously, if you bottle it up too much, that's not good for you either. There's no benefit to try and just keep that quiet. So exploring this with a couple of analogies is definitely a worthwhile thing to do. Which leads us into a body scan. So we're going to have to do that very quickly before we start off with the analogy that's going to be coming up next. So for a moment, and feel free to pause this video, take a moment to close your eyes and think of something that you might be putting off right now, like homework, scheduling a doctor's appointment, paying a bill, or submitting an application. On a physical level, how do you feel when this idea pops into your head? And where in your body would you notice that feeling the most? Like, for example, do you feel tension, discomfort? Maybe on a physical level, it's like a tightness maybe in your chest, or a feeling like a certain part of your body is getting a little too warm, or maybe a little too cold and it just doesn't feel right. And if that happens, don't feel bad if you're not happy about the idea, because, well, analogy time. The study by the aforementioned people in the previous couple of slides introduced this interesting thing called the bus driver analogy. So let's say you are a bus driver and your route and the destinations you reach are paths of life that you take. However, things change when you try to take a detour to someplace new. Maybe like, making a decision to, I don't know, study a bit more, or maybe even go to the gym, for example. For some reason, the passengers on your bus get very angry about this, and they ask you to turn back. And unfortunately, they are not very cooperative. You're not able to reason with them or to silence them. So the best way to appease them is to just go back on the route you have always been driving, and they eventually quiet down. That's the only time they quiet down. This is kind of how it connects to you. It might connect to you, it might not. The passengers are supposed to represent unpleasant feelings and thoughts in your head when you try and go towards a destination, which could be like that goal that you might have in your mind, or try to accomplish a task that's a bit time consuming. It is a bit difficult because it's not that easy to get rid of those thoughts. They are there, and of course we have to accept that they are being rather rude to us. They're making threats, and they're getting in the way of you just being able to like get through a task or solve like a homework problem. But alongside acknowledging that the thoughts are bad and that they exist, acknowledging that they are merely, for the time being, thoughts in your head, and maybe just specifically only your thoughts or just thoughts in general, intangible things, they just kind of reflect how you feel in the moment and not necessarily who you are. Unfortunately, we all get stressed out at some point, and it's just kind of how it is to be a human being. With that in mind, once we have acknowledged the fact that these things are here, but they are simply thoughts, a couple of quick diffusion exercises can be practiced. So if you want, we can pause the video after I'm done explaining what they are for you to give them a try at your own convenience. I will quickly explain them so that way I can kind of list off a couple of examples on how they could be done. So for the first one, it is best to start this off by closing your eyes and trying to visualize either a glass of milk or Coke or just something that you have experience with on a physical level. So think about how this thing will feel, how it will taste, and how it's going to look. And just sit with that for just a little bit, at your own time until you get like a feel for it. And then immediately after you get the feel for what you're imagining, say the word as fast as you can over the course of maybe like 30 seconds to maybe a minute. So if it's like a glass of milk, for example, you say the word milk over and over again for 30 seconds, like milk, 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 milk. Sometimes I personally think it's best done verbally because your brain does need to work to move the muscles in your mouth. But if you want to do it in your head as well and you're not in a position to do that in a public setting, by all means it's okay to do that in your head too because, well, you're still using your head and that's the important part. But after those 30 seconds to a minute, do you still see the image? Because maybe you've noticed that over the course of the time that you have said this word, it has turned into simply a word. You cannot really grasp the image of the object, like the milk, in your head anymore because you've said it so much that it's just a noise. And it doesn't really have much meaning when it is simply just a noise, and your thoughts are very much like that as well. Another way to do this, very straightforward, is just to acknowledge and thank your mind for coming up with these thoughts and accepting them as they are. Not to say that you should be like, oh, thanks for making me feel horrible, but it's like, well, you're here, you are in my head, and I appreciate the fact that my brain, I guess, does things on a certain capacity. They are here, and that's just how it's going to be for the time being. And it's totally okay if they stress you out to just sit with them for a bit. Maybe treat it as more of a self-care thing. Especially if you're stressed out, falling into certain coping mechanisms such as maybe going on a walk or just laying down for a little bit, maybe getting a drink of water or maybe another favorite beverage of yours while you're stressed out could help a little bit. And maybe once you sit with it for a little bit, the feeling is going to pass. I think another important one is to rephrase unpleasant feelings and thoughts by prefacing them with, I'm having the thought that, and then the thought itself. A good way to explain it is somewhat like the phrase is allowing you to put distance between yourself and your thoughts. if there was like a thick cloud of smog that represented your thoughts, both good and bad. Obviously, when there's smog, it's not very pleasant, but you still can always kind of find a way to move away from it. It's not permanently stuck to you forever, depending on how you feel about that sort of thing. And the phrase of "I'm having a thought" that allows you to kind of take a couple of steps back outside of that smog, so that way you can see the smog and you're not running away from it, but you're not letting it consume you either. And a more humorous one is to say what you have to do or how you feel about it, and just say it out loud, preferably out loud, or maybe you could just do it in your head if you're very good at doing that sort of thing, in like a very stupid, obnoxious way. And it's more of just a way to be like, ooh, I gotta take the trash out. I gotta take the trash out. Something of that sort. If you hear it from a goofy voice, you know, how easy is it to take that seriously? Not really. And maybe then if it's something menial like taking out the trash or just paying a bill, that's very easy to do. I know that tax season is around the corner by the time I'm recording this, so look, I'm not trying to be presumptuous here. You know, it's like political satire for your brain. Yeah, go ahead, feel free to pause it. I apologize if maybe the explanation was a bit lengthy, but we'll move on to the next slide in a moment. Okay, so always good to go over bad vibes, the antagonist of your values. And values are some of the things that we'll be going over very quickly. So, just for a moment, think about what you value. And it could be anything like happiness, justice, your education, relationships, etc. I mean, you can write it down on a piece of paper if you want, especially if you're not in our in-person workshops, because it would be very easy to give up if the task isn't something that's mandatory, but we may value something that motivates us to work through it. The bad thoughts that we have, as described in the bus driver analogy, are just kind of standing in the way of what we value. So in green, there's a little example here saying, I procrastinate from homework because I do not like the stress I feel when I strain myself to solve a problem, which is very real. However, I value having good grades and doing well in school, so it is still something worthwhile in the end. And obviously that differs for everyone else, so you know, you can always come up with your own. Maybe to just sit there and figure out what you truly value. So I'll give a quick moment for you to maybe think about what you value, maybe talk about what you value with somebody else, and it doesn't have to be school related. By all means, make sure that it is just something that you care about, because figuring out what you care about and kind of identifying things like that in places that mean the most to you and hold the most attention for you, I think it's a good way for you to apply that elsewhere in life, which can be a little difficult, so. Okay, now let's get to setting goals. So we have a couple of kinds of goals that we will go over, which includes the self-efficacy conversation, SMART goals, short-term goals, long-term goals, and stretch goals. So then, where do I start when it comes to setting goals in general? Revisiting what you value and why you value it is a good place to do it. So self-efficacy conversations about what you've done best, how you feel when you do your best, and how it influenced your outlook on life might be an opportunity to discover something you love and value. And you could maybe make a goal out of that. I mean, that's always a good place to start. For example, by reflecting on my best work, which can be anything, I realize I value the happiness of those around me and would like to make a career out of helping others. So when I value happiness, I realize that I can set a career goal for myself. And when you reflect on your best and how it influences you, honestly, I mean, it helps you find relevancy. Like I said before, linking these tips and tricks to things that you care about is a great way for you to establish other things to find value in and work towards in other settings. So that's always interesting to say the least. So for starters, we have SMART goals, which are goals you can set in any facet of your life. As an acronym, the S in SMART goal stands for specific. So for example, specific means something along the lines of I want to be able to lose 15 pounds. So it's not just saying I want to lose weight, you want to figure out how much weight you want to lose. So that way, when you set that goal and you actually complete it, you will know that it is complete because you have fulfilled the specific amount, for example. Measurable is the M. And that's just kind of a way to say, like, if you are going to start on your quest to complete this goal, you have to find a way to be able to track your progress. So I can track how often I go to the gym. And that could be, I suppose, maybe how many times a week is more appropriate, and how many minutes or hours a day would you exercise. A minimum for exercise, anyway, to stay healthy, I hear, is 30 minutes, so if you were ever curious about that, there we go. The A is achievable. So this is just kind of more of a way to be like, how do I keep myself afloat during this time? So that way, I'm not like setting unrealistic standards upon myself while I complete it. So a good way to make the goal of losing 15 pounds achievable is to pace yourself in exercise and maintain a good diet, which obviously differs from person to person. The R stands for relevant, which is more so kind of a why. Why did you want to set this goal to begin with? Which is very good to reinforce your confidence in the goal when you make it, and also to help you kind of regain that confidence if you ever lose sight of it in the midst of chaos. So for exercise anyway, maybe you'll say, I want to do this because I value my health. The T stands for time bound. This is kind of more like a time frame. Like what deadline could be set? So it says, I should lose 15 pounds by the end of this year, which is a pretty good deadline to say the least. The other goals, to quickly define them, short-term goals are something small you'd like to accomplish in the near future, like organizing a little party or a social outing or something of the sort. Well, it will be actually less time-consuming, and the gratification is more immediate. So maybe it's like, oh, I want to get McDonald's for some reason. Not as time-consuming as, I don't know, working towards leveling up in a video game that you're very obsessed with, and you get it very quickly. Long-term goals are obviously very big goals that you'd like to achieve that are obviously going to take a very long time, like buying a house or becoming a doctor. And stretch goals, which is something that I personally don't hear being talked about quite a bit, are kind of where you expand upon your current boundaries to acquire a new skill, which can be a short-term or long-term goal, but it's something interesting that I thought would be worth throwing in there. So these stretch goals could include things like learning a new language or being able to run farther than you normally could in, let's say, a marathon. And obviously, like all good plans, and to make sure that the A in SMART is achievable, divvy it. So very much like how there are steps in solving a math problems, our goals too would work better with phases. So just make SMART goals for each phase. If you learn how to figure out what steps are needed to, for example, get a doctorate degree in something, you can first set a SMART goal for how to fulfill your undergraduate requirements, and then maybe set another one for how to set up a research paper and how to qualify for graduate studies and so on and so forth, which will help you inch closer to your ultimate goal. And obviously, as much as I said achievable, the measurability is also very clear when you are able to split a long-term goal into a smaller section. On a psychological level, it probably might give you a little bit of encouragement because each step that is completed is a good chunk of serotonin, dopamine, gratification, all that good stuff. And obviously, when we're trying to tackle all these goals, it's important to figure out how to juggle all of that. So, here we are. Time management. Oh boy. Your entire life is not about this one big goal. As students, we all have different priorities. That's why learning how to balance them is a very big deal. To some, it might be easier. To others, Haha, might be the bane of their existence. We did the previous exercise to ease you into being more comfortable with now having the power to structure your life. Especially since, maybe we're so used to the idea of waking up at 5 or 7 a.m. to get ready to go to a school that starts at 8 a.m. But now we are tasked with managing our time on our own. We have to choose our own classes at a time that works best for us. We have to do that with our jobs now. We have to do that when setting up our own appointments, whether that be doctor's appointments, maybe passport appointments, so on and so forth. Because when we were younger, we had that all dictated by people in our lives like parents, teachers, school, and all those other sorts of things. The starting point of all of this, and we have a few, just to help you figure out how to manage your time, and they might be a bit generic, so bear with me here. The first one, which is optional, but it can be pretty helpful, is to get a relative or friend to sit with you and talk about what schedule might work with you the best. This is a great way for me to squeeze in that the counselors at DVC's counseling department, especially the ones at the DSS Center, if you are a part of DSS, and maybe even EOPS, and especially student athletes, you are more than welcome to try and either get a drop-in appointment or schedule an appointment with a counselor to talk about, well, I think for the most part, a academic schedule for yourself. So that way you know how to manage your time best and you have someone that can kind of give you recommendations. These counselors are also trained to help you with more personal matters, especially with like wellness counseling and maybe how to better take care of yourself through that. So by all means, getting a second opinion on how you want to manage your life is something that I think can benefit a good chunk of people. The next one would be making a list of what tasks you normally have to do. So, a to-do list, which might be a bit pedantic and generic to some. Some people might like writing things down in a planner, and that's been working well for them since middle school. Others might set them as little checklists on their phone to save on paper. That works either way. Sometimes having it in front of you is a great way to do that. The next step, or at least a step, is to figure out how long it takes to complete these tasks. So it might be kind of trial and error for the first couple of days if you try to take this a bit more seriously than you might have before, ? But if you keep note about how long it takes you to do something like getting out of bed or taking a shower or solving a homework problem in a very challenging class, then keeping that in mind might help you figure out how much time you have in your day to do other things and when is the best time to make plans. And finally on this slide, we obviously have the option of organizing the tasks by priority. And you can maybe just put them on a calendar or a chart, so that way not only is there prioritization in how important they are, but also there's prioritization in how soon you need to get them done. I have a couple of other options as well. So aside from the standard kind of keeping things on track with planners and whatnot, we also have time tracking apps, which can help you put into perspective how much time you spend doing certain things. So if you struggle with that, time tracker apps are definitely helpful. You might need to dedicate a few days to serve as trial runs as you go through your daily routine, and the app of your choice will allow you to either set a timer or a stopwatch to gauge your progress. I know that some of these apps don't have names on here, but personally, the one with the little plants, the trees, I think that is called Forest, and I personally recommend that one because you can set different colors for different activities that you will need to do, and I think it works either way, where it is also a countdown timer and a stopwatch, so you'll be able to keep track of how long you do specific activities for, and you grow these virtual little trees, and if you have enough coins from growing these trees, you can apparently exchange them to plant a real tree. So I think that's personally very nice. Some of these other ones, which will inevitably extend to the other kinds of time management apps I'll be mentioning, might include a subscription or a very tiny one-time purchase. So kind of limited, but I figured being transparent would be helpful so people are not immediately disappointed. The next one we have are to-do/habit tracker apps. So they are more specifically geared towards what tasks you may have to do in a day. Never hurts to have a digital checkoff list to carry with you that looks cute and is fun to work with. Honestly, some people might resonate with these kinds of apps just purely based on how it looks and how easy it is to navigate. So I do have a couple of examples up here. This one, I believe, with a red with the white check mark on it, is Habit Now. Very sleek design interface, and it allows you to have a little widget on your Android phone at least with the things you might need to do in a day. It helps you also set habits, so that way you're not going back in there every day setting up the next thing you need to do. And then if you wanted to go for something a bit more fun, the one with the griffin in the purple background, I believe, is called Habitica, and it kind of works a bit like a video game where you can create a funny little digital avatar, and as you complete tasks and whatnot, you can level up and get customizations. I hear some people enjoy that. Some people might enjoy like a simple sleekness, and other people might just prefer to organize things in tabs and wikis. And finally, in terms of apps, there are calendars/timetable apps. So there are things like time blocks, as you might see in some of these screen caps, where you dedicate a certain amount of time in a day to something, and that's a great way to visualize it. The one with the black bird in it is Tweak. Very minimalistic design. I think it might be helpful for those who just want to track what they need to do in a day, but not necessarily by the hour. These apps are a little harder to keep track of. If you wanted to get something that you can easily access but don't necessarily want to pay for, Google Calendar has an option where you can set these sort of things, but they are going to translate into business appointments and whatnot. So if you don't mind that discrepancy, then I think that might be your best bet in terms of that. So we're getting close to the end here. Thank you for bearing with me through this. We got a couple of other tips and tricks that you might have already heard that can help you manage your time. So if a planner has worked for you in the past, that is definitely something you can stick to for all your days to come. Never hurts to scribble a couple of things down either on a piece of paper or maybe just type it up somewhere. Another good one is to have a friend or relative remind you to make sure you don't forget, because sometimes, especially for some people who might have executive dysfunction, I think I said that correctly, I apologize if I might have misspoken on that. Sometimes the ability to remind ourselves is maybe a little lackluster, so we might need someone outside to be like, hey, didn't you need to fold your laundry or something? And it's like, oh yeah, you're right. And sometimes, if a person reminds you, it's like, oh yeah. It kind of insinuates that there is some expectation, even though there really isn't, and the people you should trust this with shouldn't be people that judge you, for not being able to do something, but maybe just a gentle, kind reminder would be well worth it for someone who might just need that bit of encouragement. Having a visual cue for what you value in places where you find yourself procrastinating is definitely a good one. A pro wrestler once, who was giving a presentation on how he accomplished his goals, funny enough, was that he had written in a notebook his goals and his dreams. He took that piece of paper out and he stuck it in a place that he would see every day, and it's not something that he would easily miss, and for the most part it seems to have worked out for him. I know it's maybe not the go-to for some other people, so take that trick with a grain of salt. I think it's still worth mentioning though. Organizing your space is also very important. If you declutter your desk, for example, you declutter your mind. Another good trick, which I think is probably the most reliable for some people, is to go to another space to do your work, whether that be like a different room or a student center on campus, a dining room, a cafe, the cafeteria, Personally, I recommend maybe just a public space that is dedicated to let you just sit and think for the most part. Some people like setting up shop in places like Taco Bell, so, whatever works best for them. There might be a likelihood, and this is just a guess, it might not apply to you, so dismiss it if it is not relevant, but I personally suspect that sometimes, even if we move to a different room in our own home, it might be a little difficult to focus on those things because home, for some people, might be a place where it is kind of a safe haven from the rest of the world, and you might be more likely to just kind of want to relax because home is where you rest, your room is where you rest, it is your healing chamber, and maybe homework is not in the books when it comes to healing, per se. Another one, which is kind of been on the rise, but hasn't been talked about too much in my opinion, is the Pomodoro technique, which is where you work 25 minutes on something you need to do, and when it hits 25 minutes, you take a 5-minute break in between that, and you do that every 4 work periods of 25 minutes. So after every 4 work periods, you then get to take a longer break in the form of like 15 to 30 minutes. Almost kind of like handling a shift at work, but the breaks are more frequent, and I think that's just how they should have been this whole time, but that's just me. Another one, second to last, is doing the hard tasks first and working your way down. Or more importantly, doing the tasks with the highest amount of time consumption and then working your way down, so that way it's like you finally biked your way up the hill and then you can just kind of cruise down and gain all of that momentum back. Or the other way could be doing the easy tasks first and working your way up. So maybe a good way to apply that would be like you come home, you have to do chores, and you also have to do your homework. You can start by doing chores, which might be less mentally taxing, like you put your dishes away, you do your laundry, something of that sort, and it's like, oh yeah, I did it. It all works out in the end. And then you get to your homework, so when you finally get through it, you're not like, oh, but I had to do all of this. So any option works, really. Alright, and as I prefaced before at the start of this virtual workshop, I mentioned that I personally am neurodivergent, I have autism spectrum disorder, and I also have ADHD. So I want to just kind of acknowledge my peers in saying that there is going to be a bit of a chance, if not a high one, that not everything in this presentation is going to work for some people. There's a great likelihood that neurodivergent people have been told these tricks and haven't been met with success like their peers. Studies suggest that the best combination for students with ADHD, primarily, to benefit from is therapy and medication, which not everyone can so easily access. It definitely is even harder for people to seek a diagnosis and therefore treatment if they are assigned female at birth and or are women of color, from what I've been told. People of color, I should say, which is very unfortunate and it's worth addressing. So to keep that in mind, there are a couple of resources that might make things a bit more manageable. There is Timely Care MD. If you haven't heard of it already, it is a free telehealth service that has been provided to us by our student government, ASDVC, where you can talk to both physicians and therapists on demand, or you can schedule an appointment, which is pretty good if you're ever having anxiety problems. You might need someone to talk to help you kind of mellow out. It's a 24/7 service, so you don't have to worry about oh, I'm calling too late or something. There should be always someone on the line to help you with that. Although I will say that unfortunately, although you can get a referral for certain things, especially to qualify for DVC's disability support services, they can't really diagnose or prescribe you things like ADHD and whatnot, because those are stimulants and there are a lot of regulations when it comes to obtaining them. However, I personally would recommend either talking to someone through Timely Care or perhaps a counselor to ask if there are any other resources that you could be pointed to, so that way you can see a proper specialist that will hopefully give you the proper examinations you need and the diagnosis you need, so that way you can figure out how to make your life a bit better. I also wanted to add that at the bottom, with DSS being mentioned, they also have counselors that provide executive functioning training and workshops, so you can schedule like a one-on-one appointment, or you can attend one of their workshops that's usually located in the High Tech Center on the second floor of the Student Services building. It is kind of hidden, but it is the, if you are to approach the counselor's office, if you head past the stairs to the left and walk straight down in the first entrance you see, there will be a door to your right in the corridor, and that will be the High Tech Center. Sorry if that was a little all over the place, but hopefully that helps you find where it is, because it is a bit obscure. So, I guess the final resource I wanted to add before the end of this workshop, and thank you for being ever so patient, is Wise at Work, which is another free service that you can utilize on your phone, both Android and iOS. Thanks to ASDVC, you can just sign up with your Insight email, very much like you can with TimelyMD. Wise at Work more specializes in things such as mindfulness exercises, meditations, body scans, and maybe just to help restructure how you might think in times of great stress, so that way you're not unnecessarily beating yourself up too much. Which is very nice of them, considering that there are 3 categories of exercises that kind of help you out. So one section or one category would be something along the lines of focus and motivation. The other one would be relaxation and calmness, and the other one would be something along the lines of collaboration, so you know how to deal with things such as conflict or standing up for yourself and whatnot. And even if it might be a little difficult to deal with life sometimes, I personally believe that if you are able to utilize these resources and are able to find some degree of success with them, helping you, find balance in your mental health might also help you with managing your time and whatnot. Yeah, thank you so much for sticking through this. Very much appreciate you taking the time to think about all these things. I know that time management and trying to find the golden formula, the fountain of youth, the holy grail to all of these sort of things is not very easy, but it is manageable to say the least. We are going to have another workshop at some point when it comes to self-care. So if you wanted to apply some of these things and you're thinking to yourself, like, how can I take it further so I'm not like spontaneously combusting when I'm trying to just get all of my work done, well, that workshop should be coming up in the near future, and we hope to either have you watch that video when it comes out, or come and visit us at the ACL Center at PAC 106, room 106 that is. And if you're curious, I have here kind of a very roughly put together, works cited page, just in case anyone is curious about the quick studies I looked over to try and see if I could find new relevant information, especially for my neurodivergent peers. But beyond that, that's all I have for today. Thanks for taking the time out of your day to watch this. I hope it helped you to some extent. And of course, if you have any questions, feel free to email us at, in all lowercase, successcoach@dvc.edu, or you can direct message us on Instagram at DVC Basic Needs. Thank you again, and hope you have a wonderful rest of your day.